All right. Well, thanks for joining for another episode of the Why Influence podcast. Today we got an awesome guest. His name is Andy Storch, and he is the host of the Talent Development Hot Seat podcast. He also has a personal podcast called the Andy Storch Show, and you have developed a conference and community around talent development called the Talent Development Think Tank. So you are pretty active on LinkedIn. You've got these podcasts. You've built a community, and you're building a business around that whole ecosystem. So it's pretty impressive what you built. We met, I think, 2 years ago at Podfest,
That's right.
podcast conference, and we've been keeping in touch since then. But it's the first time we finally get you here on the podcast. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been cool to see you get this going since we first met at Podfest, and to get to know you a little bit, and had your wife on my podcast talking about her books, and it's all coming together.
Yeah, small niche communities. So do you mind just explaining your brand in a couple of words, just real briefly, since I'm sure I didn't cover everything there.
Yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of it, right? And when it comes to going out and building a personal brand, I think it's really important to think about the niche that you're in. So for me, it's all about corporate talent development. So these are the people in companies that are thinking about how do we develop our people, help them become better managers, better leaders, better at their jobs. And so I started a podcast in that space a couple of years ago called the Talent Development Hot Seat. Built a big network there. Hosted a conference back in January, as you mentioned, and launched a membership community as well. And I do some consulting, I do training, facilitation. Used to fly around the country, do a lot of that in person. Now, thanks to COVID, I'm doing all of it virtually, of course, which is nice. I get to be home with my kids every night. But yeah, it's all about corporate talent development, consulting, facilitation, and then, of course, running the podcast, the conference, and the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And congrats, by the way, just for making it this far in your journey and being able to quit your job to be able to pursue your passions full time. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you said journey because it is absolutely that, right? We're always trying to figure things out. I never feel like, oh, I've got it all figured out. It's just taking the next step, the best steps. That's why I love surrounding myself with friends and mentors and people who are doing interesting things like you, that we can get ideas from and try new stuff. So, I mean, for a few years, it was just about selling training and development programs. And now, so much has grown out of the podcast that it turned into the conference and community. And working on a book, and there's always, the next steps that you can take. It's all part of the journey.
Yeah, and so you did this, like, you put a lot of effort into your personal brand and the brand of your podcast while having a full-time job and working in a career job. So it's a little bit different than maybe some people that can be like, okay, I can immerse myself full-time into, pushing this and eventually create a critical mass. So I think it's awesome to see that, you had it, I guess, somewhat as like a side hustle up to a certain point, and then it sort of grew from there.
Yeah, I mean, I started my first podcast about 4 years ago. I was still in a consulting job with a pretty cool consulting company, global company, and I knew I wanted to do more. The first podcast I started was about entrepreneurship because I wanted to get back to entrepreneurship. I had been involved in some startups early in my career, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about it. And it opened up my eyes to how easy it is to get in touch and get sort of meetings or conversations with people that you wouldn't normally get a chance to talk to. I also learned a ton, and it propelled me into what I'm doing. So as I was doing that, I eventually left the consulting company to go independent with a different company called Advantage, and that was kind of the bridge into entrepreneurship over the last 3 years. And so yeah, I had kind of the main part of my business, but I always saw building the brand, the podcast, everything as the marketing activities that I needed to be doing to build my brand, to go out and build my network and find clients. And everybody has their own maybe
Right.
tactic. If you're an entrepreneur, you're in sales. But I think going out and building the brand, using what many people call content marketing now, right, is like using it to get in touch with people, building the network. I think it's just such a big asset and really critical today to building a business in the age that we're in. And so I always saw it as this is part of what I need to be doing. I felt compelled and pulled to do it. And then you can put as much time into it as you want, right? It can be a little side thing where you spend an hour a day or a couple hours a week, or you can go all in and be spending hours a day on it.
Right.
And often you're going to get out of it what you put into it.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So, you've been sharing for quite a long time now. Do you mind sharing unintended consequence that you've received as a result of sharing? Just if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, there have been so many unintended consequences. So many people that have reached out and told me how much they've benefited from my podcast, which is essentially free content. I'm interviewing thought leaders in the talent development space. People that told me they've used it to revamp how they approach talent development in their companies. Someone told me they used it for their master's thesis in
Wow.
their education, right, in college. A conference came out of the podcast that I never saw coming. So many friendships with very influential people in that space that I never could have predicted. And then I think of some very specific examples. There's a guy named John who up in Chicago who started listening to my podcast, and he reached out and connected with me on LinkedIn. And we finally got on the phone one day, and he told me how he wanted to thank me because he realized he was having a conversation with his manager, and his manager asked him, "What are you doing to invest in yourself to better yourself?" And he realized he was doing nothing. And so he found my podcast and started listening to it. He took the book recommendations that I made on the podcast and started digging into those, and just completely changed his outlook and his mindset on life, and really turned a lot of things around. And so he reached out to thank me for that. It was, of course, amazing to hear that, and it turned into a great friendship. He and I talk all the time. He bought a ticket to my conference and came, so we got to meet in person. Actually, we met when I had a business meeting up in Chicago, and I had went and got lunch with him and another friend who I met through LinkedIn and through this whole journey through podcasting, who's become a good friend. But then both of them came to the conference as well, and now we keep in touch. We've got a great friendship, and none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the podcast.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, it's somebody who, you never could have imagined the kind of impact that you would have starting this out, and the fact that you had this much impact on somebody who's in a career, who's like looking to self improve themselves, finds your podcast, and then just goes all in with it. And
Yeah.
now you've got this new relationship with someone that follows what you're doing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's been cool to see. And, he couldn't even get his company to pay for a ticket to my conference. So he paid out of pocket. I was grateful.
Wow.
And I know he got a lot of value from it. And then from that, there were 150 people there. He made a bunch of friends, a bunch of new connections. We're all growing our networks together when you invest in this stuff and you put content out there. And now he's posting articles regularly on LinkedIn about career development. His name's John Hernandez. He posts some great stuff on career development, and so now he's impacting other people. And
Nice.
it's amazing to think that maybe that got started because he started listening to my podcast.
Yeah. So you do quite a bit of things. You've got your podcast, both of them. You've got your community that you've been building. So like you've grown influence just sort of across these different platforms and on LinkedIn through personal connections. So I'll try to keep it like high level for you to like choose where to go with it. But if you met someone today who's like, hey, I want to you know start building influence, and I'm in a job and I'm looking to grow a community, what would be some of the biggest advice that you would give to somebody who's like just thinking about it or maybe just started and is in the
Yeah.
early stages?
Um, First of all, there's so much advice and information and guidance out there, right? There's books, there's courses, there's people posting about it on social media. I would say, pick some avenue you want to go on, learn as much as you can. Don't overdo it, but learn a good amount. And then dive in and give it a shot, right? Whether it's starting a podcast, starting a YouTube channel, starting a blog, and don't worry so much about the numbers. Oh, it's not that big. I'm not getting the engagement that Jeremy's getting or somebody else is getting, right? You got to just get started and get practice doing it and focus on all the benefits that come from it. It's not just about the numbers and the quantity of influence. If you can impact the life of one or two people, or you can use it to build your network and meet new people. Like I said, I've made so many friends and grown my network so much through not only the content I put out, but using that, setting up interviews, and then meeting so many other people. And then because I had a podcast, I started going to podcast conferences, and then I made a lot of friends like meeting in person at conferences, and just look at where that can go. But I would say, pick a direction, pick a platform, a medium where you want to start putting something out there. And it could be a social media channel, right? For me, I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. For you, it might be Instagram or Facebook or even TikTok, whatever it is. Pick something, learn as much as you can about it, and start trying stuff, and start connecting with other people who are doing it in that space. So LinkedIn, I always connect with as many of the quote influencers, people who seem like they're really successful on there, and I follow what they're doing and I watch what they're doing and think, okay, how can I replicate that? What can I learn from that? How can I get better as a result? And I'm always trying to get better. I'm always trying to improve by learning from the masters in that space. Keep building the network. Get a coach or join a mastermind group. I'm in 2 mastermind groups. They've been incredibly helpful for me in my journey in getting guidance on the things that I'm doing. And then I think the last thing is, don't get overwhelmed. Remember that it is a journey, right? You start out in the first year you do it, you might get hardly anything, crickets, right? But you keep going and going and building and building and practicing. And then you make a pivot and you pivot to the next thing. And then suddenly something catches fire. I don't know. I mean, I've never been, I never felt like, oh, I've got this huge following or huge influence or anything like that, right? I don't have a ton of followers in any one place. I mean, LinkedIn's maybe the most, but it's building in that niche. And next thing I know, it started out slow, posting stuff on LinkedIn, getting 1 or 2 likes. And then, 2 years later, I'm hosting a conference, and then I'm starting this community and people are jumping in. It takes time, right? You got to build. If you follow Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, he's a hero of mine. He preaches about patience all the time, right? Putting in the hard work, having patience, doing the right things, and knowing that eventually it's going to pay off. It's easy to look at all those people that have had like it seems like they were overnight successes, and we all want that too. But most of the time, that's not what happens, right? They've been building for years, and we all have to do that, right? And just see where the journey takes us.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's crammed full of tons of advice there. I mean, the hardest part, I think, is just getting started. So I liked how you talked about, choose something and then learn about it, but you don't need to be perfect with it, and then just, get started and then experiment and keep trying and keep doing it. And then eventually, it'll go from 1 like to 2 likes to starting a whole conference like it has.
Yeah, right. And you said something really important there, which is don't be perfect with it. I think a lot of people who are self-proclaimed perfectionists tend to hold themselves back, right? Because, oh, this is not the perfect post. I'm not going to put it out there. Someone might not like it. You got it. Progress over perfection, or perfection is the enemy of progress, many people say, right? So you got to just be willing to put stuff out there and make mistakes and have people laugh at you, right? Especially those people that are not really your supporters, and just put that aside and keep going.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So in regards to, let's say you meet someone who's more established in the sharing space. So they've maybe established a little bit of a community. They've maybe even did a small conference, and they've got a podcast going. What are some like the most common mistakes that you're seeing that people make, or that you've made, or like the biggest opportunities that people might be overlooking?
That's interesting. I mean, everybody's got their own styles and approaches to different things. When I think about the mistakes that I see people make, sometimes you see people get a little bit too arrogant, let stuff go to their heads and think that they are better than the people who are maybe following them or other people out in the community, and forgetting that we're all just humans just trying to do stuff, right? So I always try to keep a humble mindset, approach to a lot of these things. I see people who are too quick to ask people for things without maybe giving some type of value first, and really not building that relationship. Somebody reached out to me the other day, sent me a message on Facebook and said, "Hey, I'm launching this podcast on this date. I would love for you to post this time and this time about this." And I'm like, dude, I hardly know you. And you're like giving me a marketing plan to post about your podcast. Like, that's not going to happen. Whereas I remember having a conversation with my wife about it because I was just upset about his approach. Whereas if he had come from a place of, giving as much value to me as possible and just letting me know that he's starting a podcast, I would probably go and support it. I've had 2 friends recently who published books who asked me for nothing, and I went out and promoted their books because they have always given to me. They've always been helpful to me, been kind. I know they're great people, and I want to help them, and I want their help when I publish my book, right? So remember, karma, whatever you want to call it,
right?
Try to help as many people as you can put as much value out there as you can, so that people want to come back and help you. So I think, the other mistake I see people making is maybe just not leaning into the helping others first, giving value first, and just trying to ask people to like their page or support their launch or whatever, especially when it has nothing to do with them. It's just really silly. And then people just not building their network. Go build your network, build relationships with people doing similar things as you. Don't think that you have it all figured out, because nobody does, and learn from as many people as possible. That's the approach that I take all the time.
I like that. Yeah, I think making sure that you stay humble as you grow these larger communities. I mean, I've met people that have very large communities, and they're still, if anything, more humble than maybe they started out as. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's the right way to approach it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Great advice there. All right, so aside from the advice, let's dive a little bit into your story here. So you talked about how you started the podcast because you felt like it was like a necessary step to sort of build leads, maybe get some sales, like just for your career progression.
Yeah.
Do you mind going back to when you first, was the podcast the first time you really put yourself out there in a large intentional way?
Yeah, and the first one was that entrepreneurship podcast I mentioned. It was called the Entrepreneur Hot Seat, and that was in 2017. I joined a mastermind group for dads, run by a guy named Larry Hagner, who runs the Dad's Edge group and podcast, which is a huge podcast. And he challenged everybody in the group to set a big goal for 90 days. And so for whatever reason, I decided, I've been listening to podcasts for years. I'm going to start a podcast. And so that was the first time I started really putting myself out there. I learned as much as I could about it. I started scheduling interviews. I was terrified. I was nervous. I found out I have a great strength, a knack for interviewing. Curiosity is a big part of who I am. And so I would conduct interviews, but the podcast never got very big. But it allowed me to make a lot of great connections and, have a lot of great conversations, learn a lot about entrepreneurship, start, promoting, practicing, putting things out on social media. I think it was, I don't know, maybe 50 or more episodes of interviews before I ever attempted doing like a solo episode, on my own. Because I was like, why would anybody care what I have to say? But it allowed me to find my voice and build my confidence. And then it opened my eyes to, I can use this to get conversations with, all these influential people who wouldn't normally take the time to talk to me, right? Because they want to go promote themselves. In fact, I remember that moment when I told my wife, that I couldn't believe these people were just saying yes to having conversations with me. And my wife is a former journalist, and she was like, yeah, of course, people want to promote themselves. So of course they're going to say yes. I'm like, oh, I had no idea. So, figuring that stuff out. So that's why when I went to become an independent consultant, and I was really going all in on selling and running training programs and looking to make more connections in that talent development world. And I decided to focus in on that niche of talent development. I started the podcast, the Talent Development Hot Seat. And honestly, when I started that in mid 2018, I think the main reason was to have an excuse to meet with high level potential clients, executives who are head of HR, head of learning for big companies. And I said at the time, like, I don't care if anybody even listens to this. I'm going to try to make it good. I just want to get these. I just want to get these meetings because we book it and then we get on Zoom, we get on video, we build a relationship, and then I can look for opportunities to work with them. And it worked really well. I started booking those conversations and building relationships with people. Some of them turned into clients. But then the podcast also grew in terms of following. And that's the other benefit of building a niche is I promoted it, probably not as much as I could have or should have, but people would find it all the time because they were searching for talent development podcasts, right? They're searching for podcasts in their niche. So people would find it and then send me messages how much they love it. And again, not a huge podcast, but it's done well. It's had over 100,000 downloads and, developed a pretty good following. I still didn't I ran it for, a year and a half without really selling anything on it, trying to monetize it, until we started, I started putting this conference together with my friend Bennett. And, so we were doing everything possible to market this conference. We had never hosted one before. And I started promoting it on the podcast. And I remember the day I was at another conference up in Reading, Pennsylvania, the Growth Now Movement live concert hosted by Justin Schenk. You might have met him at Podfest. He runs a great event up there.
Yeah.
And I was there with my buddies, Vincent Puglisi and Ken Carfagno. And I remember looking at the email on my phone, and there were 2 sales. This is very early on. We had sold 1 or 2 tickets already for the conference to a personal connection. 2 people bought tickets to the conference that I had never met before, and they heard about it on the podcast. And these are like $1,500 tickets. So these are not cheap tickets.
Nice.
And I couldn't believe it. It was the amazing first step of like, oh my gosh, I've kind of monetized my podcast now. Like I have a following. People like this content so much they're willing to buy a ticket to my conference. And then it kind of grew from there. It was slow trajectory over the next few months. I think that was April or May. June, July, we sold a few more. And then August was just it really started pouring in. And the conference was originally scheduled for November. We sold it out in October, about a month before. And this is, by the way, please don't, if you're listening to this, please don't listen to this and think, oh, another one of those like magic, he turned it on and sold, made a bunch of money. I worked my ass off for 8 months, like sending emails to everybody and LinkedIn messages, posting about it, marketing on the podcast. We ran Facebook ads, Google ads. We formed alliances with people. We did PR, tried everything. And it, all came together. It worked. And we sold out this conference. And we also designed what I think was a really, really phenomenal conference. And we heard from all of our attendees who were there that it was the best conference they ever attended. And it was because of the mission that we had, the purpose, the way we designed it, the facilitators and speakers we brought in. And people really liked the food too, but I didn't make that. That was the hotel. But it all started with the podcast. And then now I'm growing this membership community. And again, it's starting with all the connections I've made from the podcast, which led to the conference. And I haven't even, as you and I are recording this, I haven't even really started to market it on the podcast yet, but it's been on my to-do list for days, and I'm going to start doing that soon. Yeah. So that's a lot of the journey right there, especially with the Talent Development Podcast.
Yeah, that's amazing. And thanks for sharing. I mean, so you started it out and you experimented with a podcast, then started a podcast in this niche to get conversations. And even then you didn't monetize it for over 1.5 years. So that just shows that, you have to put a lot of work up front. I mean, you can't get to where you are today without doing all that free giving and all that effort and work that it took to get to where you are.
Yeah. I was always afraid to sell too quickly and turn people off. Now, other people are very successful doing that. I probably could have been selling stuff sooner. But quite frankly, at the time, the things I was selling were more high-end consulting and training programs. So I was more looking to build the relationships and get people on calls and then find those opportunities for the higher end stuff. But now, with the conference and then now with the community, I've got some things that people could potentially just go buy. So I think it's a balance, but I definitely caution against selling too quickly. Again, going back to what I said earlier, all about giving a lot of value, establishing your brand as someone who's, knowledgeable and authority in a space. And then people want to follow you and they want to be in touch. They want to have you in your network and they want to buy from you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't made $1 from my podcast yet.
Wait a minute, you charged me $200 to come on here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. So let's go back real quick to the beginning again, because you talked about how you were in this mastermind group and you had this 90-day challenge where you wanted to start a podcast. Were you nervous to put your voice out there? Like, what did that look like that first entrepreneur podcast situation?
Oh yeah, I was so nervous. I'm trying to remember the first interview. First interview I did was with my friend Jason Teeters. It was just a buddy in my mastermind group. Was like, yeah, I'll talk to you. And then I remember the third one I did was with I'm drawing a blank now on the guy's name, but a pretty big time influencer in the entrepreneur space. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, he's talking to me. And this guy had done 1,000 interviews. So, he would talk to anybody, but I didn't realize that at the time. Yeah. Just going back to when you're in this space and you're trying to promote stuff, you'll go on any podcast, just about any interview, right? Until you get so big that you're like, no, I'm sorry. I don't have, I've invited people on who have no, I'm too busy for you. But it's rare. But yeah, I was really nervous about putting that out there. I was doing all the editing and everything myself at the time. Am I doing this right? And quite frankly, I am not a detail oriented person. So I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But you stumble through this stuff and nobody cares that much. Nobody gets, I've had people message me and be like, "Hey, I saw you publish your podcast. There's nothing on there, but just an intro." It's like, oh crap, I forgot to put the whole episode. Let me go fix that. But it's not like anybody's really angry about it. That's why I think it's important to be willing to just try stuff and make mistakes. But yeah, I was really nervous. And that's why I said that was a long time before I was willing to even put myself out there in terms of like sharing my own point of view. But I was also practicing that, doing a lot of sharing on social media, especially Facebook, within groups, within the dad's group I mentioned, and then other groups, mastermind groups that I joined, and just really listening to people's challenges and contributing as much as I can, taking things I learned, bringing, spinning that back and helping people. And
And that was
really
before the
building.
podcast.
Well, that was as I was doing the podcast, but I wasn't doing it on the podcast yet.
Okay.
I was really just asking people questions on the podcast. And then I started doing some solo episodes every now and then, sharing some things that I'm doing. And I still don't do that a lot, but I do a decent amount. And it's really more about just sitting down and making the time to do it, right? I've been really kind of sporadic with it. But that whole journey, when I think back, you ask about going back to that early time, just like almost anybody else, incredibly nervous, scared, not knowing where this is going to go, highly optimistic, hopeful. This is going to turn into some big thing, right? And all these entrepreneurs are going to follow me. And that never happened, but it turned into the next thing, which turned into the next thing, which led to where I am today.
Yeah. I mean, if you would have never started the first podcast, you would have never had that realization like, hey, I can get these conversations. Let me like apply it to my career.
Right.
And then now you've got this podcast and community that you've built over the years.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And sometimes you got to take that first step. And even if that thing doesn't work out the way you want it to, it'll give you the idea to get to the next thing, which will get you the next thing, or even just give you the platform to have conversations with people that might lead to new things. I mean, that you asked about unintended consequences earlier. When I started that entrepreneurship podcast, I early on in that journey, maybe 30 episodes in, I interviewed a guy named Vincent Puglisi, who was coming out with a book called Freelance to Freedom. And I had met him through the dad's group and offered to interview him on the podcast to talk about his book. And we did the interview, and then we ended up talking for like 2 more hours. And he said he was going to start a mastermind group. And I said, if you do, I'll join. And I joined it. And that was 3 years ago. He's today my best friend, my mentor, has helped me through so much of my life and business, helped me transition to becoming a full-time entrepreneur. And none of that would have happened if I didn't have the podcast. And again, going back to like thinking about when you start something like that, think about all the benefits that come, because maybe 100 people listen to that interview. I don't know. I wasn't getting big download numbers, maybe less than that, but who cares? Like he and I had that conversation, which led to a really great friendship. And that's all that matters to me.
Yeah. I've had several conversations now that once the interview is over, we start chatting. And I had one the other week that we talked for like over an hour.
Yeah. And then you're like, why am I not recording this? This is good stuff.
Yeah. And then on StreamYard, you can't like start recording again once it's
That's
over.
right. Yeah. Unlike Zoom. Good point.
Yeah. I mean, that's an amazing journey. So when did you give yourself like permission to have this bigger voice, like to start the podcast? Like,
that's an interesting question. I think I've slowly been building my confidence. I think a lot of, I have to start listening. One shift I've made in the journey and I think one of the things you're asking about is like, how do you get, for those of us that deal with some type of imposter syndrome, or, how do we deal with that? Because I've dealt with that big time. First of all, you got to start listening and embracing the compliments that people give you, because I would get a lot of them. And people tell me all the time, "Oh, you're amazing. All the stuff you're doing, amazing." And I just throw it right back, like, "Well, thanks. So are you. Like, we're all on this journey together." And I truly believe it. But we need to be willing to embrace the compliments we get, because people do admire us for the different skills and strengths that we have, right? So starting to let that sink in. There's been some important conversations along the way. I remember one when I was heading to that conference in Pennsylvania, talking to my friend Ken Carfagno, and I talked to him about just having imposter syndrome around all this, like starting a conference and everything. Like, will people be willing to look to me? And he was like, you really got to embrace this. Like, people, you don't have to be the absolute expert, but you're the one that's putting the great information out there. People like the way that you're doing it. They like the stuff that you're doing. And, you're great on stage, and you're the one who's bringing everybody together. You need to embrace that. And I listened to him and took it to heart. And I've made some shifts, and been more willing to just put my voice out there in terms of whether it's solo episodes, contributing more to conversations and the interviews I'm having, hosting a conference, getting on stage, talking about different stuff, putting this group together, and realizing that I don't have to be the expert in any one position, any one thing. For me, it's about being the connector. I'm the one that brings it all together. And then also by listening, conducting over 300 interviews, I have become a little bit of an expert because,
Right.
how do you become an expert? You either work in something for like 30 years, or you read a crap ton of books, or you just interview all the experts. And then if you listen to them, then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I actually know a lot about this subject. Right.
Yeah.
So I know a lot about a lot from doing all those interviews. And you realize that when you're interviewing experts, and the light bulb clicks, and it's like, oh, I kind of like, I'm already nodding in agreement because I already knew a lot of this stuff. None of it's revolutionary. That said, it's a balance, right? You never want to become arrogant about it. You want to keep a humble mindset that you can always continue to learn from everybody. But it's embracing the knowledge you have, and building confidence around that to say, like, yeah, I've learned a lot about this. I'm connected to all these people. I've got a strength, and I'm going to put that out there. I'm going to, even be willing to let people pay me for that. It's a tough shift that I've made over the years, but I know a lot of people have done the same.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. I mean, when I created my first couple episodes, my first 3, I gave myself permission to re-record myself. So I just like in post-editing, asked the questions again more confidently and concisely. And
Nice.
it's the first time I was sharing online.
Yeah.
And then people would like, oh, you got a good radio voice and stuff. And like, it
Yep.
took me a while to be like, I guess I should just let them say that and,
Yeah,
embrace
you
it.
do. You have a great voice, right? Just let them give you the compliment. Don't turn it away.
Yeah, I like that advice. So how has this journey like changed you? Like thinking back to who you were back before starting your first entrepreneur podcast to who you are today. Like what's different about you? How have you evolved as a person?
Yeah, confidence is a big one. Mission, purpose, realizing that I have the power and influence to help a lot of people, whether it be professionally or personally, and being willing to put content out there, whether it's podcast or social media, starting the conference community, whatever it is, to be able to impact people, knowing that I have unique strengths that I bring to the table, embracing those, owning those strengths that I have, and being willing to jump in more, making that shift from the mindset of even getting all those accolades for a long time, the mindset of, oh, I'm just a regular guy who happens to be, doing some awesome stuff, but I'm not like those influencers that are big time. I remember I was at a mastermind retreat in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, and I was talking about that and some of my insecurities around it. How like I had this big vision. I want to influence the lives of thousands of people and be on these big stages, but I'm just a normal guy who happens to be doing awesome stuff. I'm not like those big time players. And this guy named Adam McCarty, who was in the group at the time, he looked at me and he said, Andy, the only difference between you and them is that they're doing it. And I was like, ah, crap.
Right.
You got me with that one. Like, there's not like a special, influencer gene, or like you got to apply and get let into the club. Like, you just go out there and do it. And so after that, I gave myself permission to just go do it and be that person. I never refer to myself as an influencer, but a person of influence, a person who can make a big difference, make a big impact, and remind myself that I have a mission to go make a big impact. And therefore I want to get on more stages. I want to get on more platforms. I want to put more content out there because I want to influence more people. And so that drives me to continue to create content for the podcast, post on social media every day, accept those offers to go on podcasts or speak on virtual summits or speak on stages. I got one this morning. Someone asked me to speak on a virtual summit. Like, cool. let's go. Right. This all adds up to more influence, to be able to, and now I'm working on a book and giving myself permission to say, I'm an author. I'm a speaker, and when I put this stuff out there, when I don't worry about judgment or rejection or failure, when I put stuff out there, I have the opportunity and the chance to go impact the lives of a lot of people. And if I don't do that, if I shrink back, if I let that fear hold me back of those things like rejection, judgment, that sort of stuff, then I'm almost being selfish, right? Because now
Right.
I'm not helping those people. Go think about John Hernandez, going back as just as an example. If I didn't put that stuff out there, if I didn't put the podcast out there, would his life has been impacted the same way? Like, where would he be now? I don't know. And I'm not so arrogant to think that like I've completely changed his life and he would be out on the street or something. Like, he's fine. He's a great guy. He's a father, 2 kids. He has a decent job. But because I was willing to put that stuff out there, I've impacted people's lives. Because I'm willing to put that stuff out there on a daily basis, I know I'm impacting people's lives. Just like I follow certain people and their content, the things that they do impact me. And I'm so grateful that they were willing to put that stuff out there, give themselves the permission to do it so that they could impact my life, because I haven't done this in a vacuum. I haven't done it alone. I follow a lot of people. There's been influencers who have, or people, speakers, authors who have made a big impact on me. And I think of where I would be if I didn't get to learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. Actually, I had a guest that talked about that pretty well. His name is Devon Brown, and he said that if you find a voice that tends to resonate with people and make an impact on them, then you're basically ripping people off by not going as big as possible. So he was saying to just stop ripping people off and to go bigger. And like that's resonated with me. That was from like episode 6 or 7 of my podcast.
I like that.
But
yeah. Stop ripping people off. Stop holding back. Don't be selfish. I like it.
So real quick, I'd like to talk a little bit about your, like, how did you transition from like, you had this podcast to now have a conference and community. Like what's the community look like for you? Like,
so I've been building the community. It's modeled on other communities that I've been involved in terms of like, I want it to be a central place for people to go and share best practices, trends, ask questions, learn from each other. It's a fairly basic setup. It's more about community than the content. Some out there are more about content. There's all kinds of different ways. I've been studying this, right? Memberships, all kinds of different ways you can approach it. I've been a member in a bunch and learn from those experiences. So for me, it's about community. So I've got a Facebook group I'm setting up where people can ask kind of daily questions, engage. And then I'm organizing Zoom calls on a weekly basis for the group. And the way I have approached it is not to do some huge convoluted launch, like is popular in some spaces. I set it up. I have an assistant who's helping me with some of the marketing back end. Even as she was working on the website, I didn't even have the website set up. I just created a checkout page I use Thrivecart, but there's plenty of other things you can use, right, for checkout. I just started reaching out to people in my network and saying, and this is following advice of some of my mentors, saying, hey, this is what I'm starting. This is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to be. Have you been a part of something like this before? Do you have any feedback? Do you have any ideas for me? And I genuinely wanted to get that feedback. And also, by the way, if this sounds good and you're ready to join, here's a link. You can go join it, right? And I sent that out. I just started sending individual emails out to a lot of people in my network. We'll say on average 10, 20 a day. Probably 200 over the last 3 weeks. It's been a lot. Nice. And reaching out individually to people, and then just certain email lists. So I have all the people that went to my conference. I sent multiple emails to them. I have a podcast email list that I haven't really, it's not huge, but it's probably 600 people. I haven't really worked that yet. I've sent one email out that mentioned it. And so people started slowly joining. The first day I sent a group of emails out, somebody joined within like 2 hours. This woman named Megan, and I was so grateful, so excited. And then it was a couple of days before somebody else joined. And I was like, okay, is this actually going to get traction? But then since then, doing this personal outreach, I've averaged about 1 to 2 people joining per day. For the first couple of weeks, it was basically
Wow.
one per weekday of people joining, right?
Nice.
And I did this kind of founding member launch where decided my regular price was going to be $100, $97 a month, or $1,000 for the year. But I would basically do almost half price, so 57 for the month or 600 for the year for the founding members, the first 25 who join. And I just reaching out to as many people as possible. So then, like I said, trickling in one person a day over the last few days, as you and I are recording this on July 1st, over the last few days, I've seen 2 or 3 people join per day. This week, I reached out to a woman who I spoke with once a year ago. We've kind of kept in touch on LinkedIn. She runs talent development for a software company, and she wrote back right away and said, can you send me a direct invoice? I want to pay for a team of 5 to join. I was like, great,
Oh, wow.
that's awesome. I was hoping that would happen, but I wasn't pushing it. And so she paid for that. And so now, as we record this, I think I have 24 members. So I'm one shy of my goal to get to the 25 founding member launch. And then the next step is I'll start mentioning it more on the podcast. I'll put it out to the podcast email list. And I'll start doing more marketing on LinkedIn and just general marketing. I'm planning a virtual summit in the space as a marketing, tactic, if you will, marketing strategy to grow the email list and the brand and market for the community. And I sat down the other day and made a list of, 60 potential speakers who are all people I've connected with through the podcast or LinkedIn who would be attractive. People would want to see speak on the summit. And then that'll hopefully grow it. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm really big on networking, personal relationships. I'm not big on and I haven't done a great job of this, of build the big email list and just put stuff out there and sell to that. So instead, I've just taken the very I guess I'm not really big on guns, but I guess it's like the sniper approach versus the shotgun or whatever. But going after specific people that I know would be interested in joining, getting them to sign up early, and then getting that traction. Cause I know it's also going to be a work in progress as I practice and put things together, the welcome email is going to be wrong or the link's not going to work or something. Right. And these people will be more forgiving too. And so I've got my 25 in and I'm going to just ramp up marketing from here and continue to grow the group, continue to try to get feedback from them and try to find ways to add value. And I am confident this is going to turn into something pretty good, pretty big. And I'm staking my livelihood on it because it's the big thing I'm working on for my business right now. So I'm going all in on it.
Yeah. Well, congrats up to this point. You're almost to that 25th. Maybe after this episode, maybe someone will join. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I should check my email. And by the way, there's all different ways to utilize this stuff and turn it into a business. For me, I've realized that my strength is being a connector, networking, facilitating. And so I've wanted to start a membership community for a long time. And I let that imposter syndrome and those limiting beliefs hold me back. There were also some other complications I was dealing with in the business. But now is the time. And I'm really excited about it. So this also if someone's like, man, I can't believe, first of all, someone might be like, oh, it took you 3 weeks to get 25 members, but plenty of other people might be like, I can't believe you filled it so fast. Remember that I have been building this for quite a while. I mean, a couple of years that I've been building the foundation for this to be able to go out to people and say, hey, I just started this. Do you want to join? And get people to sign up. And I've had, of those 24, I think at least 9 of them are paid for the year, not just on a monthly basis. So it's pretty cool to see where it's going.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
Going off of that a little bit, I've had listeners request that from a high level view, just like income sources, I guess, that you could generate as from doing like an influencer type of career.
Yeah.
And, obviously this is something that is major that you're working on right now, but maybe what are some other things at a high level that you would say that you've experienced as far as generating income for a lifestyle?
There's really a lot out there, and I held myself back from a lot of them for a while, I think, because of the the limiting belief, the imposter syndrome kind of thing. But the world continues to open up. So we talked about the conference and the community. I know a lot of people that sell coaching and consulting via their podcast. I've gotten consulting brought in consulting clients from my guests, from, basically booking them as guests, getting on and then starting the conversation. So that's become an income source. Um, Affiliate deals. So I have affiliate deals in place with other thought leader solution providers, and I continue to build that network. Because of the podcast, I built a relationship with a guy named Tim who runs a coaching business, and now I'm introducing him to clients. There's another couple other people recently that I've been introducing them to, people in my network, and basically they sell their services and they give me a cut, right? And I don't have to do anything, and I make money from that. And that's the value that I bring is I've got the network, I've built the trust, and then I can just bring them in and they can do their demo. And if people want to buy it, they do, and then they give me a significant cut. It's different for everybody. So I'm counting on that becoming a pretty good revenue stream soon. I have also started. You may have already noticed this, Jeremy. When you start a podcast, you get tons of people reaching out to you who want to come on your podcast, right? Especially from podcast bookers and PR firms. I started pushing back on some of those in the last few months and saying, you got to pay if you want to come on. And I got this idea from a couple other people who have done it. And a couple people said yes. And I've had paid guests who paid me $400 to come on as a guest on my podcast. And so that's a little bit of a potential revenue source, right? And it's all with good taste, right? Does this person still bring value to the audience, and are they the right fit and everything else? But they're selling something, right? And they're using the platform that I've built, that you've built, and spent money and time on building. So I've convinced myself that it's okay to ask them to pay for that. Trying to think of what other avenues, income sources there have been, because I know there's potential for other stuff out there, but I just haven't even dived into all of it yet.
I mean, that's what you've got experience with, which is already
right. Yeah, it's what I've done. I mean, there's sponsorship, right? I do have a sponsor for my talent development podcast, and they pay me for reimburse for all the expenses, and then pay for me to run it. So that's become a little bit of an income stream as well. So sponsorship, and we talked about the affiliate stuff. There's one other thing I was thinking of, but I can't remember what it is. But there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being transparent about all that. That's very useful for a lot of people, I'm sure.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. So we've covered a lot here. You've shared a ton of advice, and we talked a lot about your story. Knowing the audience, how there's a lot of people who are either trying to overcome the barriers to start sharing, or to overcome barriers to going bigger, maybe the imposter syndrome, like you've been mentioning quite a bit. Do you have any last words for the listeners here today before I open the floor for you to talk about the best way to reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah. I would go back to, I would say two things. One, be intentional about what you want to do, who you want to do it for, who you want to serve. Think about your niche, think about who you are and what you want to be known for. What is that brand that you want to develop, and what does that look like? And how much work are you willing to put into it? I think those things are really important. A lot of people don't think about that stuff. I didn't even think about that stuff very much when I first started. The more you can define those things, I think is really, really helpful. And then the second thing is like I said, progress over perfection. You just got to put stuff out there, and be willing to make mistakes, be willing to fail, but know that if you're willing to put yourself out there, you can make an impact and maybe even build a business around it. And I'll add the third thing, which is get help. Be willing to invest. If you want others, this is like another soapbox, right? Like if you want others to invest in you and maybe buy things from you, be willing to buy things from others. Hire a coach, join a mastermind, buy a course, buy those products from those other influencers that you follow. And that's another way to get in their sphere of influence, or, get on their radar as well. But learn from the people that have done it before you. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, I guess they say. Learn from the masters, because there are a lot of people out there that have done it, and that proved that you can do it too. There's plenty of space for everybody. There's plenty of opportunity. I actually had a call the other day with a woman who I had interviewed on my podcast. She was in a corporate role. Right after that, she got laid off. And we got on the phone, and I was like, hey, what are you doing? How can I support you? And she's like, well, I've decided to go and run my own business. I'm starting a podcast and a YouTube channel in the HR space, and I'm starting a membership community. Basically, she said she was going to do everything that I'm doing. And I was like, wow, cool. how can I help you? And I had to grit my teeth for a second, but remember, try to keep an abundance mindset. There are bajillions of potential customers, listeners, money. There's more than enough money, customers, and success out there in the world. So there's no reason to be like fighting over it or rooting against others, that sort of thing. So I wish her the best. We made an agreement to like help support each other, have each other on each other's as guest speakers in our communities and that sort of thing. And I'm always out there to try to help and support everybody around me that I can, knowing that that's going to come back to me. So seek help, seek to help others, and be willing to put yourself out there.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing. Andy, you've shared so much value with us today. I'm going to put links to all of your social medias, all your podcasts, everything in the show notes for this episode. But what's the best way for someone to reach out to you? Like someone listened to the episode today and got a lot of value and just want to say, hey, Andy, like, thanks for sharing this. What's the best preferred method for that?
Yeah. First of all, I would love that. If you are listening to this, connect with me, reach out to me, let me know that you did. Reach out to Jeremy, let him know that you listened to it and that you got value. When we do these things, we do them because we want to help other people, right? And so I love hearing that I've made an impact. So I'm most active on LinkedIn, Andy Storch, Storch. I'm pretty active on Instagram as well, so you can follow me, message me there. I'm on Facebook. I don't do as much with Twitter or TikTok. You got to pick your battles. And my email is andy@andystorch.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that everyone has access to all the information in the show notes for the episode. But I just want to say thanks again for coming on here and sharing your journey, sharing all your advice, and being so vulnerable with a lot of the information that you shared. It's very helpful I know for myself, but I'm sure it has been for others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate it.
Sure. And one last thing before I let you go, because I am on my sharing journey, I like to ask for feedback. So I'm just curious if you have any feedback for how the podcast went or any constructive criticism. I like to ask that at the end.
Oh, I like that question. Are we live on the feedback too?
We are, yeah.
Oh man, talk about vulnerability. I like it. Geez, I like the format. I like the questions. Would just say, I think as a host, and this happened to me yesterday, another interview I did too. Something I think about is cadence. And when I'm asking people questions, I want to make sure that I'm guiding them on a little bit of a journey and letting them know where we're going. And so as a guest, I look to the host, right, to guide me on that journey. And I think you did a pretty good job of that. The one thing I would say, and I see a lot of people doing this, is if you pause, if you ask a question, then I answer it, and then you pause, to me, if it's a long pause, that's a signal that you want me to speak again. And sometimes it wasn't that clear in the interview that we just did. If like you wanted me to talk again, or you were about to ask another question. And this is not uncommon. I did an interview yesterday with a guy named Aaron for his personal brand podcast, and he did the same thing. And I was like a little bit confused. Like, and a couple times I think we stumbled over each other because I was like, so does he want me to talk again, or is he going to ask the next question? So when I'm doing interviews, if I know that I want to move on to the next question, I'll try to make that transition pretty tight, pretty quick, so that there's there's no like awkward pause in there. That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah.
Nice. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, Sean said I listened, so thank you.
Nice.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to maybe having you on again sometime in the future as your journey evolves.
Cool. Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you guys for listening here today. I hope you got a lot of value, and if you did, make sure to go ahead and check out Andy's content.